Okay, time for a new video. So this one's not really about the evolutionary psychology of the World Cup, but kind of, indirectly, maybe. Um, I'm going to put forward here this is another sort of speculative video. So I'm going to speculate on um, what I might, what might be true in terms of sort of an evolutionary psychological explanation of interest in certain kinds of sporting games. And this did arise from a conversation I was having the other day with someone about the World Cup and sort of expressed my lack of interest in soccer. And that led me to think about some other things that led me to think of maybe all these sporting games, or maybe not all. I mean, I'm sure that obviously there's ones that are not going to be included in these categories I'm going to provide you today. An amazing number of them are in fact condensable into a small set of categories. And I'm wondering if those categories are tapping into something very specific about our evolved psychology. It's a bit like, for those of you who are familiar with the trolley car experiment, sort of a problem in ethics, where you're asked if you would flick a switch. If you know the trolley car coming and it's coming in a direction that's going to kill 5 people, would you flick a switch and redirect it in a direction which will only kill 1 person? And as much as people might not like the options, most people say they will do that. But then you're given a second scenario where you have to actually, the way to stop the trolley car from killing the 5 people is to physically push another person off a bridge onto the trolley tracks I mean, there's some version of this, right? And so there's this dilemma. Why, people are willing to flip the switch, but, a lot fewer people are willing to push the person off the bridge, right? But it turns out that, in fact, these 2 scenarios actually stimulate different parts of the brain, right? They're tapping into different evolutionary preferences. So I'm wondering if these games in sports that so many people find so interesting are tapping into different parts of the brain. So I'm going to do some speculation on this, and of course the test of this would be someone actually did the work and found out if what I'm saying is true, if different parts of the brains are stimulated by different games, and if the parts of the brain stimulated by the particular games, in fact, are the same parts of the brain, but are stimulated by the evolutionary dispositions, which I'm going to associate to those groups of games when we actually get around to talking about it in a moment. So that's the gist of what I'm trying to do here. So yeah, so this rose out of this idea of, is it possible the different sporting games are tapping into different parts of our evolved psychology? So I started thinking about how you might bundle together lots of different kinds of games. And the first one that obviously comes to mind is racing. Right? I mean, racing is racing, right? I mean, it's pretty straightforward, right? 2 or more competitors are trying to cross a finish line before the others. And of course, there's all kinds of different kinds of races. You have individual races and you have team races. And there's all kinds of different methods of locomotion involved in racing. From running with your legs to rowing a boat to all kinds of different things, right? And then there's different kinds of racing. There's racing where you actually are racing in real time against another individual, or there's racing against a clock. As in, skiing or bobsledding or something. Your time is recorded, and the one who gets the fastest time, wins, sort of thing. But it's still racing, right? I mean, you're racing against the clock, but you're really racing against other people. When the clock, it's maybe not as visceral as it is when you're individuals directly racing in real time against each other, but this is all still racing. So what is it about racing that would stimulate something in our evolved psychology? Well, I mean, the obvious thing would be some kind of predation or predator avoidance mechanism, right? Excuse me, itchy nose. I mean, that seems pretty obvious, and humans are our ancestors. Have been both, right? We've been the predator and we've been the prey, right? And our even more distant ancestors were more likely to be prey. So yeah, it's you would expect if we've got evolved psychology, you would expect some kind of evolved disposition for a keenness to the chase, if the chase is a life and death sort of thing. So that would explain, interest in racing, right? And that seems pretty straightforward. I don't think, that's the least bit controversial. Now, to get back to soccer, World Cup and soccer. So I was asked about soccer, and I thought, yeah, I don't, soccer doesn't interest me that much for some reason. And I was thinking about the fact that there are other kinds of games that are very similar to soccer that also don't interest me. And it occurred to me that those games are all really the same game, right? They're all basically the same game. So I would put in this category soccer, hockey, basketball, American style football, I would include, rugby, um, lacrosse, water polo. I mean, there's all kinds of these games, right? And they're basically the same game. Now, of course, there's differences, right? They're played on a designated playing surface, and that surface, slightly different shape, slightly different sizes, um, and the number of players involved will change, and the ball, or we'll just say ball, and can be different in different games, a puck and hockey or whatever, can be different size and shape and things like that. But I mean, basically it's the same game. And the game is basically, you have this playing surface, you have two teams with presumably the same number of players on each side, and they each have a territory, right? The playing surface is divided in half, and they each have a home territory, and the object of the game is for each team to penetrate deeply into the home territory of the other team and score in some way. And of course, the way you score varies from game to game, obviously, but you're trying to score deep in the other team's home territory. You're invading their territory and scoring. And scoring, I think, is, can be thought of as kind of a symbolic stand-in for what, capturing their flag or capturing their headquarters or killing their leader or something like this, right? And you just have a series of iterations of this contest over the course of a game, and the one who is successful more often is the one that wins the game. So, like I said, these are basically the same game. And what is these games? These are games about tribal warfare, right? They're games about coalitional violence. And in many cases, you look at the history of these games, they really were substitutes for warfare in certain cases. And sometimes, they're quite violent. I mean, some of them still are. No, not all of them, but some of them are still quite violent. And some of them used to be much more violent. Excuse me. So I mean, this, and of course, it's interesting that by far the audience for these games are males, and males have a long history of sort of an evolved disposition for and evolved capacities for being effective at managing forms of coalitional violence. There's very few species engage in the kind of coalitional violence arising from coalitions, right? This kind of coalitional violence is pretty unique to humans, not entirely, but pretty unique to humans, and we seem to be highly evolved for it. And it's men who have engaged in this violence, so it's not shocking that men would find particularly intriguing these games, which are basically games of tribal warfare. So that covers a lot of games. Another set of games are what you might call the hot potato games. Now I'm going down I think those two are the first two are pretty straightforward. There's this third one maybe goes out on a limb a little bit, but maybe not as much. I mean, you tell me what you think. So I'm going to say there's a series of games that I'm going to call the hot potato game. And hot potato games usually, though maybe not necessarily, but usually involve a net. And basically, it involves people knocking a ball back and forth across a net, right? So, I mean, the kind of games that this, would include would be tennis and badminton and volleyball. table tennis, there may be others, but I mean, these are the ones that obviously come to mind. So what's going on in these games, right? The objective is to get the ball sort of stuck in the other person's court or field of play or home territory, right? Now, in some games, the ball literally can't touch the ground. Like in volleyball, if it touches the ground, then, it's in your territory. You're stuck with it, right? Um, and in others, you get the bounce. Like in tennis, you can bounce once, right? I mean, I haven't played tennis in so long, but I'm pretty sure you're allowed to bounce once in tennis, but you can't bounce more than once. If you bounce more than once, then it's in the territory, right? So basically, you're trying to get the ball dead in the other team's territory. Well, what's the fascination then with getting the ball out of your territory and trying to get it into the other person's territory? So I wonder if maybe what's going on in those games is some kind of evolved anxiety about infection or contamination, because it's artificial in a certain sense, because when the rules of the game, the ball's in, then you kind of lose, but what something's there, like a virus or a bacteria or something, because it's like being infected in some way because something's in your space that you don't want to be there. So it seems as though it's triggering those kind of evolved pathogen-resistant impulses. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that anyone who plays this game or people who invented these games or whatever, thought of it this way, but it doesn't seem to me unreasonable to suggest that that kind of anxiety about infection and contamination may be part of what gives the emotional weight to those kind of games. So it's something like really get this thing out of my space, out of my territory. So, so there's three categories that include a lot of games, and all three can be pretty easily identified with a pretty obvious and well-established evolved aspect of human psychology. And then, though, we come to a fourth category of games. It's just barely a category at all, and that's what's sometimes called bat and ball games. Now, in North America, and increasingly around much of the world, the really prominent version of this is baseball. Now, the other version, which in some corners is huge, though a more limited part of the world, I think, is cricket. And I don't really know very much. I know a little bit, but I don't know very much about cricket, so I won't presume to talk about cricket here. So I'll restrict myself to baseball. And as far as I can tell, these are the only two bat and ball games. Now, there's versions, right, of this, slow pitch and softball and different kinds of things, right? But these are all just variations of baseball, usually actually made easier for people who are less athletic or whatever, right? So I'm just going to focus on baseball. So it's not immediately obvious to me what baseball is tapping into, and I wonder if in some ways it's a too new a sport to have any kind of evolved psychology in the obvious direct way that the other three do. Now, obviously, it's got to be tapping into something, but its history is interesting, right? If you read about the history of baseball, it really arises alongside, parallel to the second industrial revolution of the late 19th, early 20th century, and it seems like a lot of the popularity of the game has arose out of those particular circumstances. And there's a couple of ways. Now, in some ways, it's sort of the anti-form of the Industrial Revolution, because you have this whole sort of pastoral sensibility, like you're playing in a field, you're going to a field of grass to play baseball, right? So it's almost anti-industrial and anti-urban and all that, sort of stuff associated with the growth of factories and giant cities in the second industrial revolution. But there's also something weirdly industrial about the organization of the game of baseball. So it's like you have this series of the whole game is premised on a series of batters coming up one after another, which almost has a sort of mass production assembly line feel about it, right? There's a continuous series of batters coming up and having to be retired or dealt with in one way or another. That's a weirdly industrial sort of dimension to the game. I don't know. It's very strange. But baseball is an odd game. It like all these other games. I mean, leaving races aside, but the other two games, the sort of hot potato and the tribal warfare type games, I mean, those games are built around taking taking control of the game, which involves taking control of the ball, as it were, right? The ball is sort of the metaphor for control of the game. If you control the ball, you control the game, right? And all these games, like in the tribal warfare games, right? In soccer and hockey and basketball, all these games, right? You can win the game by controlling the ball. I mean, first of all, if you have the ball or the pockets, whatever, then the other team can't score, right? If your team is in control of it, passing it back and forth, the other team can't score, right? That's the first thing, right? So you can actually take it away from them and prevent them from being able to win. And of course, famously in a lot of these games, the winning team will get control of the ball and just run out the clock, right? Um, and though it's not as stark, there's an element of this in the hot potato or infection type games too, right? Because you win serve, right? The more you win points, the more you keep serve, the more you're in control of the ball, right? So even those games have an element of controlling the ball, right? There's none of that in baseball, right? There's none of that in baseball. You can't do that. Everyone gets 27 outs, right? Everyone gets minimum of 27 batters to come to the plate, right? You can't prevent them from coming to the plate, right? If you're winning the game of the ninth inning, you can forego your last three outs and just say, oh, well, we're done. We're done at the top of the ninth inning. We're done because we're winning. We're the home team and we're winning, right? But you can't deny anyone their full 27 outs. You have to retire 27 outs on the other side before you can say you've won the game. So there's kind of, I don't know if I want to call this democracy or something, but there's something sort of interestingly democratic or something about that. I'm not sure that's quite the right word. I'm gonna have to think about that. But there's something distinctive there, emphasizing a role of equal opportunity or something like that. Something akin to sort of democratic culture is that everyone gets their fair chance, right? Um, and everyone in the lineup gets at least. I mean, when you set your nine hitters who are going to come up and hit on your baseball team, I mean, they're all going to get um, again, except for the weird case where you're the home team winning in the ninth inning, they're all guaranteed to have three at bats. Everyone gets three at bats, right? So unless you're pitch hit for or whatever. So yeah, so weird. So there's this weird democratization kind of egalitarianism to baseball. The other thing about baseball that's interesting is the high level of individualism. It's a weird sport because it's played as a team sport, and there's certain moments where a sort of team element comes in. I mean, playing sound defense, involves working like a team. And there's certain kinds of hitting situations where individuals will sacrifice their ability to get a base hit to be able to help the team, a sacrifice bunt or a sacrifice fly or something, or just hitting to move the runner over kind of thing. But for the most part, this is a team sport built around individual contests. The fate of a baseball game is largely, not entirely, I mean, good defense makes a difference, I'm not denying that, but for the most part, the outcome of every baseball game is determined by the outcome of a set of individual challenges between a pitcher and a hitter. That's again, it's a little simple because, there's a battery. Let's say the battery of the pitcher and the catcher is a team fighting against this one guy, this one hitter. So that was weird. Anyway, so this is a weird game, right? I mean, it's got this sort of democratization element, this sort of equality of opportunity element, and this heavy emphasis within a team context of individual accomplishment, individual achievement, individual competition. And and none of the other games have this interesting competition. So, or these distinctive qualities, let's say. So it's a weird game. It's different, very different from all the others, and I'm not really sure what it taps into. I'm wondering if maybe the dispositions that inspire us around this game are in so many ways so modern that it's harder to identify what the evolutionary roots of these things are. Um, yeah, if you're looking for stuff, I guess you could look at the work of someone like Christopher Baum in Hierarchy in the Forest and his ideas about, sort of democratization of early human social groups, stuff like that. I mean, there's got to be stuff in there that's being appealed to for baseball to be as popular as it has been for over 100 years. But I don't think that those things are as directly primal as the evolved dispositions that make these other games so interesting and so compelling. And I'm not sure people ever get, I'm not sure, in baseball you ever get the sort of ferocious kind of fanship that you get with, the soccer thug lads, and even some hockey types get pretty thuggish and stuff, because I think these are appealing to much deeper, primal, evolved psychological mechanisms. I'm suspecting baseball is appealing to maybe appealing to things that are newer, but if it's appealing to older things, it's appealing to them in a less direct, more cerebral route, something like that. So, so I mean, and like I say, the test for this would be, the prediction on this would be do some tests, do some fMRI tests on people, watching these games, fans of these games are watching them and see are different parts of the brain being lit up. And if those parts of the brain correspond to things like, predator avoidance parts of the brain, or, coalitional violence parts of the brain, or, this sort of thing. Um, 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 Parasite avoidance parts of the brain, and then this would suggest that I'm on something. And for all I know, this is old hat, and someone's already done the research, and I made all this up, but I just reinvented the wheel. So, but anyways, whether I did something original here or not, I thought it was interesting that I'd share it. That's that. Something soon coming new, I promise. Over and out. Ciao.